Sandy. And I wanted to pull out a couple of threads here about what we don't know. And we've talked about some of the challenges of knowing, but I want to put a finer point on what are some of the things where you think that we are perhaps collectively kind of overly confident in some of our assertions that might actually require a bit more humility as one of the values that underpins the work that we do here at ACF, not only rigor, but also humility, knowing the limits of what we know so that we and others can go forth and try to understand it better. I don't know if Jodi, you or Lee want to speak a little bit to that question of, what do we not know if we don't go to China? If we can't be on the ground, what are the things where we should be a little cautious in drawing some conclusions?
Well, I think this speaks to the need to have more people on the ground in China, more journalists, more academics, as well as more Chinese academics and journalists in the US, which is going to be a problem here if this proposal from the Department of Homeland Security goes through, which would limit foreign journalists on I visas to 8 months without a necessary automatic renewal. So this is a problem on this side, getting Chinese journalists here, because of course the best journalism is done when you are, and we found this, our OPC awards winners go to these places. They get sources there. They see things that you're not going to see. And in China, this is particularly important because of course the government wants to control what you see. You go on a so-called junket that they've rearranged or they've arranged, it's not going to tell you what you need to know. So I think that's what we don't know is going to be greater if we're not there. It's that simple. And both the same for Chinese journalists reporting on the US, trying to report fairly on the US. Thank you.
Recently, a young Chinese told me something. I thought that was really poetic. And she said, China is a country that looks really good from drones. From drones, and then you look down because they are like the highways, the bridges. China just built the world's tallest, highest bridge in Guizhou. I saw a lot of US media cover that. It's a great picture, great image. And then, also the skyscrapers, the high-speed trains, and all those things, it's really looks amazing. And for me personally, last time I was in China was the Chinese New Year of 2020. And we all know that Wuhan was locked down. Then I rushed back to Hong Kong. And then I was kicked out of Hong Kong in 2021, and I haven't been back to China. I've been covering China from outside China. And so I'm always worried I will lose the real touch, the real feelings of China. I worry about it all the time. The smell, the taste, the vibe, you can't. It's very hard to get that when you are covering something from afar. I remember in 2021, I wrote a column about the rise of Chinese domestic brands that were competing with multinational brands like Starbucks, like P&G or whatever, like Nike. Then there was one ice cream brand, 钟雪糕. People like young people they really loved it. They talk about it all the time. I just couldn't get hold of that ice cream. I couldn't taste it. I just didn't know it was really good. It was just like a vibe, right? A hype. And so that was something you could never tell. Of course, now I'm sure if I look really hard, I might be able to find something here in the US, but it was during the pandemic. So I also missed the dinner discussions in Beijing and Hong Kong, and visiting places in China. For example, I asked my friends when they were going to visit Xiong'an, if you know that city. It's a pet project of Xi Jinping, basically a city built on Xi Jinping's vision. When my friends, I heard some friends were going there, asked them to videotape, take a lot of photos and videotape, and then just kind of, I wanted to get some feel of it. There are a lot of frustrations about that. So it's also, to echo Jodi's points, it's I'm really worried about we don't have enough people on the ground in China, and we do have journalists. While we do have journalists in China, they are surveilled, they are threatened constantly, and it is also hard for them to go out to write, to cover China. And the Chinese people are intimidated all the time, and also by the authorities. And it's almost like a crime speaking to the foreign media, because you're like DDoS, you hand over the bad materials to hostile foreign media. That's what the Fang episode during the Wuhan lockdown came from. It's like, you should not talk bad about China, otherwise you're hurting your motherland, and then you're helping the house of. Anyway, it's just very difficult for journalists like me who are covering China from afar, but it's also very difficult for journalists inside China to cover China. So there are a lot of challenges.
Can I ask a follow-up, which is that, with shrinking bureaus and staffing inside China, how have outlets like Bloomberg and the New York Times been kind of rethinking their China coverage? What do you see as some of the implications of this shift for the types of stories that are chosen, sourcing and verification? Would either of you like to comment?
To be honest, I'm not, I'm a columnist. I work from home almost all the time. I don't really, I stay up around midnight every day. So I don't really I don't even go to the New York office, our headquarters. We have two correspondents in China, Vivian Wang and Case Bradshaw, and it's such huge country for the two of them just to travel to places. Case covered a lot about trade, geopolitics, and Vivian, I just love Vivian Wang's stories. If you have time, I highly recommend you read her stories, about this guy who was in Guizhou, in rural Guizhou, I believe it was Guizhou, and who refused, who did not want his house to be torn down by the government. Then he just kept building up and built like a nine-floor building. It was like crazy story. It's a really show like the spirit of Chinese people. And also she just wrote another story the other day about the last mile of food delivery. How do you deliver food to 70th floor in Shenzhen? And when the elevator wait is like 30 minutes. And so it was like so great. I love Vivian's coverage. And those are like, of course, when we had 8 correspondents in China before 2020, so many of us could go out and write stories. Some of us covered more arts, demographics. I covered tech. They're like just, you have more spectrum to write about things. Now it's like, I feel like the two of them, they work so hard. They have to cover from so many aspects. And it's such huge country, 1.4 billion people. I just hope, to echo Jodi's point, I think we need more business.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the New York Times and Bloomberg and Reuters and the European publications who do have bureaus and presence in China are doing what they can. I think that their standards are being upheld, their independent journalist standards, they work very hard on accuracy and fairness and an independent voice. I don't think they, say, okay, we have to, lower our standards. I haven't seen any of that in the coverage. I think they're doing what they can, but it's hard. I mean, the New York Times is covering, China and Hong Kong from Seoul now. That's where the bureau is. And I think that, a lot of publications have moved people to Singapore from Hong Kong. So it makes it harder. I do think, in a bright spot, if you will, there is more independent journalism of China through places like Substack. Bill Bishop's Sinoism is one of the most popular, most read things, most subscribed things to on Substack. You are seeing that. You are seeing some independent publications against all odds crop up, somewhat in the mainland, but in Hong Kong, where many have been closed down. Others are popping up. So I do think there is a spirit there to try to cover as much as journalists can, but again, it's tough. And for instance, economic data. A lot of publications, and I know Bloomberg and Reuters, have run their own data and in some cases to verify, to try to be as accurate as they can about the economic picture in China, not just relying on what the state is telling them. Thank you.
Thanks, that's great. Turning to the scholarly perspective, I know that the space for journalists has become very constricted, and there are certainly concerns and challenges on the expert side as well. But both of you, Andy and Ling, spoke about the importance of field work. And so I'm, even if you didn't get stopped at the border, nonetheless, how has the experience of doing field work changed over the last decade or so? If you were, making the case that we should continue to still do it, what could you, to put a fine point on it, what is the value of doing this kind of on-the-ground research, and what specific insights do you think in your own research you couldn't have gotten any other way?
Sure, if I can, thank you. So losing access or having constricted access, means a lot of things, at least for me and the people that I'm working with and training and so on. So I think the first thing is that we lose kind of the gray areas of data collection. One of the things, like in China, if you do everything the way you're supposed to do it, nothing ever gets done. So everything is always a little bit of a, just a kind of massaging of opportunities and finding ways to be lucky. But these kinds of happy accidents don't happen if you're not there. So one of the articles that I'm most proud of on centralization in China, that came just somebody, it was actually interviewing somebody from Nike in Shanghai, and he mentioned that. And that, just kind of threw it out there, like, of course you know about this, right? And of course I didn't know about this. And it became a research agenda just by virtue of being, having this kind of a happy accident. For people who do archival stuff, the digitalization of everything means that you can't find that misplaced kind of document or set of documents in the stacks that eventually, that ultimately, give you much more information than anything else. So that's one part of it. Another part of it is, the increasing anxiety about harming interlocutors in China. Sheena Greitens and Rory Truex wrote a piece, was published in the China Quarterly in 2020 called Repressive Experiences Among China Scholars. And one of the big findings there is that on the one hand, scholars do not generally self-censor, but when they do so not out of fear of not getting future access, but rather because they're afraid of compromising the people who provide them with the data. So that's really, really important. And as I mentioned before, a lot of this kind of falls on the shoulder of, or a lot of the people who are victimized by this are junior scholars. I wanted to also kind of, Yuan has been really, really good at articulating things better than I might have. But what I would like to do is just kind of riff on one of the things that she was saying about vibes, about smells, tastes, things like that. This is really, really important to just get a feel for the place, not only to help test your own research, but also for pedagogical reasons. Particularly, and you might get this later, with students increasingly feel uncomfortable about actually going to China. It means it puts more of a burden, which I'm happy to take on, to bring more of everyday China into the classroom. Leo had mentioned vibes. I think vibes are really, really important, but I think another way of thinking about those is as instincts. My students have heard me say this a zillion times, but at the best moments, you might have 20 or 30% of the data that you need. And so you have to make inferences. You have to close these gaps of knowledge. And the best resource you have are your instincts. And those instincts are based on what you're constantly taking in from spending time on the ground in China. And we lose that. And sometimes we not even know what's going on. I'll just give one example. I remember I returned from my honeymoon in Thailand. My new wife and I were going through Guangdong, and we saw all of these photos of Deng Xiaoping just everywhere. And we were wondering, well, what's going on? Of course, that was February of 1992. And I was based in Shanghai at the time, and I could feel a palpable, almost tangible change week by week as we moved from February 1992 to October of 1992 to the 14th Party Congress. And essentially with Deng Xiaoping's reform agenda being put back on track. And you could sense the excitement bubbling just below the surface. Cautious excitement, but nonetheless, you had it was a very, very different feel from a year before that. And unless you were on the ground in China, first of all, you didn't know if it was happening in real time, even if you didn't know what it was. But the other thing is that you can really speak about the importance of politics at the at street level by experiencing that yourself. So we lose all of that.
Ling, did you want to add anything?
Let me just add a couple of points from my personal perspective as a researcher and how I see the broader field. When I was doing research for my first book project, and in general, I started going to China field a lot more, starting 2008, and broadly speaking, 2010, 2011-ish, I was able to access a lot of and conduct a lot of interviews, hundreds of them. And at the time, the picture was so different that I would go to banquets with local bureaucrats and drink with them, get their perspective. And this is partly how you formulate your hypothesis for your theory, not necessarily in a formal one-on-one interview, but that affects your perspective, your insights. And also I could interview a lot of enterprises such as Huawei, such as ZTE. At the time, most people have not heard of them yet. So they, it's like I took for granted these opportunities to conduct interviews. But starting in 2015-ish, I started to experience difficulties that whenever I go to the field, for example, trying to interview about technology innovation of enterprises, certain development of enterprise, or how local governments help them, the access was not great, and I was, without naming names, I was referred to some of the PDF documents on their official website. They said, well, what we're gonna tell you, well, exactly verbatim repeating of like, I would just read from this PDF document, maybe you can just go to download by yourself, right? So that is a big change compared to before that period. Of course, increasingly we come to a time that if you want to interview Huawei, well, everyone has heard of Huawei by now, right? So that becomes, when an enterprise raises up to that level and there are certain sensitivities involved, it's very hard to get access. So there's a general broader field, a general broader trend in our field for our pipeline scholars that this lack of access problem is causing them to focus more on survey experiments or online surveys, public opinions, topics related to public opinions, instead of, for example, examining what's the actual impacts of trade war, right? They're examining what are the public opinions about trade war. There is general trend because of lack of access to interview to focus more on observational quantitative studies, survey experiments, machine learning, and or things that happened decades ago, because things happened decades ago, you have more well-developed secondary resources instead of contemporary period where you still have to develop the first-hand experience. So that affects both our methods and the topic as well. Now, one thing I noticed, which originally could be a good trend, is in the pipeline of China experts, there are more and more scholars that are from mainland China. That is, more and more there are Chinese students coming to the States and get their PhDs and eventually become professors. But the most unfortunate thing, I think, is, well, originally they were equipped with language tools and everything to access China. But because of this limitation and constraint, also because of the trend of our own discipline, right? As Andy mentioned, we're not seeing a lot of this kind of works. You know, that is one of the things that is really one of the things that we could have done better than that we have not. I will just stop here and maybe